All right, now, we'll call to order, again, the Board of Commissioners work session for July 23rd, 2019. We have a fairly full 7-item business agenda, so we'll get right at it. And the first item up for discussion is the draft Waxhaw naming policy.
Good afternoon. We would like to present the Waxhaw naming policy. This is a policy that the PCR has been working on this past year, part of their work plan. And we'll dive right into it. So over this past year, the PCR have been diligently working on the naming policy. They have looked at other towns and organizations for best practices and came up with this concise plan. This is an overview of what's in your plan. You also have it at your seat, and it was also given out last week. So wanted to make sure that you had enough time to be able to look it over. So this is basically an overview of what's in the plan. I broke out a couple of the items because I thought we needed to just take an extra little look at certain subject matters. Purpose. The purpose of the plan is to create a naming policy that will help us for our future buildings, parks, but it helps us reflect who we are, and it gives that identification and geographically to our town. So that's the kind of the main goal of the naming policy. How we get there. So these are different ways that a subject matter would come up. So through development or a purchase, also reopening a facility or a park, changing ownerships, also with donations or dedications, or if the BOC feels that something needs to be updated, then we can update it. This is kind of like the cycle of how the process works. So an application would come in, or a request from the board, and then similar to what the art policy is, we would have the board would select the 5 members, and that's 3 from our current committees and then 2 from our citizen base. Then it would go into the committee for review for the application, follow all the procedures and guidelines, come back to the BOC for the final vote. Is there any questions about that? So I want to make sure that that circle comes back around for you.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
What is the I know you explained the purpose of the naming committee that would have to be formed, so why would the town staff just not recommend directly to the board as far as for that, rather than go through having to create another committee?
Well, the committee gives you a wider base of kind of ideas, and so you can either choose to do a contest. I know a contest was done for Town Creek, or you go through back. Let me go back. So
That wasn't through a committee, though, right?
it
That was
wasn't. But I think staff brought that forward to be a contest. So this gives you rules so you can select what kind of element you would like to do to name something. So if it's a future park, which we know that we're rated for future parks, you would select, especially if an application came in for a building or a piece of artwork, things like that. So if it's already up and going, it's basically giving you a chance to go through guidelines without any think of the right word. With having objective members on it, so we can help you process it better. Give me another question, Ms. Brenda.
Well, I'll just tell you my opinion
Okay.
on it. I don't, just for me, in reading this, I don't think that we need a naming committee to have to go through, choose committee members, and then have that committee, and then go through all the process of changing, when I would trust the staff to send recommendations to whatever board is in place for determining that.
Okay.
Just my thoughts on it.
Okay.
Yeah, I had kind of highlighted that area as well. I think naming is very sensitive, and you have to be very careful with that. And we've seen a lot of instances across the state, across the country, where naming you can get yourself into a little bit of trouble. I have no qualms about staff selecting or coming together with some suggestions, bouncing it off the Parks and Rec Advisory Committee. But I just kind of I tend to lean towards staff ought to be going against the policy and vetting it and validating it, and then getting input from the community. It's got to be community looked at, vetted, absolutely. But I think on stuff like this, I think we're better off having staff do the vetting of the policy first. That personal opinion.
I would agree with that. I think we're creating an extra layer of bureaucracy that we don't necessarily need.
I'm with them. That's my question. I didn't understand why we were doing this or why it was necessary to do this, We already have policies in place for staff and, presented to the board. I don't see the need for this.
So is it the need to have a separate committee, or is it
For me, it's the committee. I don't think the committee.
the committee?
Yeah.
So the
Committee.
policy itself
Policy is
that's
good.
laid out, you're okay with staff directing it and then coming to the board? So is that's
Yeah, we'll
the
get
crux
we'll
of
get to
it?
some of the
Okay,
specific
all right.
questions here in a
Okay.
minute,
Yeah,
the
and-
policy, but yeah.
Okay.
One thing here also is that the naming committee reserves, kind of what jumped out at me, committee reserves the right to reject any and all proposed names if the committee feels the names are not up to town standards. I just think that's a staff board
Which letter was that, Ms. Brenda?
decision. It's E on page 2.
Sam got it.
Basically, what we're suggesting is D&E come out,
Hmm.
the naming committee, so
Okay.
at least the consensus of that is.
Not a problem.
Thank you, Dena.
Oh, no worries.
Are we going ahead with other
You-
comments at this time?
Do you have more,
Yeah.
yeah, well,
Yes, ma'am.
Well,
Yes,
to be
yes.
clear on this one, if we're doing the vetting staff-wise, that's understood, do you want to have community input as part of the naming process, or, okay, and then what would that look like in your mind?
Yes, I think that's good to get some different
Have a
ideas.
public hearing period kind of a thing.
Okay.
Kind of like you did with naming Town Creek Park. You made it a contest with the
Contest.
public. You came in, but then you went through and,
And, yeah, Process
it had to
approved.
be something that was appropriate.
correct. That's the reason, I think it's important to have a policy too,
Right.
because.
Absolutely.
Excuse me. Okay.
Well, I mean, without a policy, you could end up with anything from the hurtful to the ridiculous. We could end up with Parky McParkface. So it's not where we want to go.
continue.
Okay. So, like many of our policies, this is a fluid document that we also need to update in around 5 years. So I just want to make sure that's understood on that. There's no budget implications on this policy. With that being said,
Other than the fact, if you're going to name it, you're going to put up a sign and you're going to decorate it, and, I mean, there was
That's
no
part of
budget
the-
for, there was,
there's no budget, like, to.
my point is, it cost $2,000 to put the sign up for Town Creek Park, so it's I mean, you can't say there's no budget impact. There is, but it's not that significant, and it would just be incorporated into your Park and Rec plan, operational plan.
Correct. With that being said, we would like to bring back the naming policy with your changes at the next meeting for y'all to consider adoption.
Okay, so that means you want some discussion, right?
Yes, sir.
Okay, so who would like to go first? Commissioner Lee?
I just had a few where the language seemed a little convoluted. Page 2, section F, part F, it says, "The person and/or organization to which the facility is named in honor of." That's a very convoluted sentence. Just as a communications person, I might suggest the person and organization in whose honor the facility is named. And the other one that confused me a little bit was above the, we're taking out D, so I guess that doesn't matter anymore. In that case, never mind. That's the only one that I thought the language was tricky.
Commissioner Westlake?
I didn't have anything else that's been said.
Mayor Pro Tem? So a couple things. I think in comparing it to others across the state, where it says facility, I think we could be a little bit more definitive with the definition. And what seems to be working, not just property owner leased, but it's our assets such as buildings, structures, recreation, and open areas and park sites. In other words, that distinguishes it from some other things that have naming, like streets and roads and all that kind of stuff, and just make it specific to that. I can send that to you. That came straight from the town of Cary in terms of the problem that they had where people went a little bit too far with stuff, and so they quantified it very specifically. The question I had was, do we have a sponsorship policy? And how does this relate to sponsorship?
So the PCR work plan for this session is going to request to do a sponsorship donation policy.
So then I would say this should come back to the board next year in terms, make sure that we don't override the sponsorship policy with this. I mean, the two, you have to bring those two together. Again, that's not to change it, it's just make sure they're in sync. Under renaming of facilities, and I can send this to you, but I think a statement in there, and this would be on staff, that some form of critical examination needs to occur to ensure that we're not diminishing the original naming justification for the name in the first place. So, Town Creek Park, I want to rename it. I submit an application. Everybody goes after it. What was the original Somebody needs to go back and say, hey, pause a minute. Let's look at this and make sure that we're not just renaming for the sake of renaming, and we haven't done ourselves harm. And then the only other thing to just reinforce what you said in terms of getting public input, guidelines for name selection, underneath there somewhere, I would put a statement, even if it's under one, has broad public support, have broad public support. That makes sure that we're going out there and getting that public input.
Would you like a percentage or
Just, no, your judgment, but, or the staff's judgment, but in terms of, can it come up and said, yep, I talked to one person, I got broad public support, you might get a question, you know? So that's a judgment call. I mean, when they did the contest for Town Creek, I think they got 60 applications or something like that. That's pretty impressive.
Yeah,
you know, that's
decent.
So, other than that, those were my thought processes. Anybody else? So it is your intent then to kind of weave these in and shoot it back to the board, and you want to have it up as a motion on the August 13th meeting?
That would be
Okay.
awesome.
Okay, very good. Okay. Put that folder aside and let's talk about the WAA agreement now.
Okay. WAA agreement. We've been working very diligently over pretty much almost the last year to get this solid to bring back to the BOC, and we're just going to dive right in it. So we have a wonderful partnership with our Waxhaw Athletic Association team, and I just wanted to give some highlights. Great community partner. The association brings recreational athletic services to our citizens, which is something that we desperately need for our citizens. The update agreement will grow the needs for our athletic space and availability to our citizens at Nesbitt Park. How does the agreement work? The town provides Nesbitt Park for the space. In exchange, the WAA facilitates the recreational athletic program for our citizens. The town provides the infrastructure as the park and then the main common areas. WAA maintains the fields and the athletic program. This is just an overview of how detailed this agreement is. So you'll see kind of like the table of contents of understanding that we really dove in to try to put as much language in there for both of us, and just want to make sure that you understand the detail and the collaboration. The WAA Volunteers and the Park and Rec team. The volunteers and staff who help the citizens and of course, our facility are excellent. They're working as a team to bring the best program we can to the town. WAA utilizes Nesbitt for baseball, softball, soccer, for the main sports, but they do occasionally go out there for other sports that's in their lineup list. Countless hours to prepare the season, the players, the fields, is a testament to the dedication of the WAA. The town embodies that same passion for professionalism. We want the look and feel of Nesbitt to be a professional park, and that's our goal. To give you a little heads up about the WAA Volunteers, in our agreement, it has a placeholder in there that talks about the association of time and money. The WAA, you can kind of equivalent that to $21 an hour, roughly, for their volunteer hours. That's with helping out with the fields, but that's also the volunteer coaches. So it definitely does have a budgetary impact that saves the town. Field maintenance and usage. The WAA has the first right for reservation of the fields. The town has the right to have programming and events, but they give the WAA a good notice for any upcoming events or programs and third-party rentals. Maintenance plan. We have a schedule within the plan, the agreement itself, and then also we work together on capital improvement request. Insurance and liability. The WAA agreed to basically put all their sports under the town. I'm not saying it right. The WAA places the town on their insurance for all sports that happen at Nesbitt. Also, they have a generalized liability for equipment and for field usage. So we have those in place to assure the town. Park rules and procedures. We have our new ordinances that we got that you so graciously passed in the fall, and so we're going to work on all new signage that happens at all of our parks and facilities to update those rules and ordinance. The WA has that in their packet as well, and been aware of them, and to help us have a wonderful safety and healthy outing for our facility, for our citizens. Documents and procedures. We have protocol in place to make sure if there is an incident or closing or any safety related items, they know who to call. There's a timeline. We get the incident report in, and they've been diligently working with staff to make sure that we stay on top of that protocol.
Who's the keeper of that record?
I am. Rentals and payments. So the WAA has set up a Google Calendar that we go through. We go through them to set up any times that we use it for programming or a third party. And then that, if it is a third party rental, that fee goes back into the general fund to help support the town and park system. The payment, utilities, and funding of projects, the WA is responsible for 100% of their utility use. I just want to make sure that's clear. Only when they, so for lighting of the fields, only when they use it. If we use it for the town for any programming or third party, we take that off, so they're not charged that. But they pay 100% of their use. Okay, just want to make sure that's clear. Any light replacement, like light bulbs and things like that for the big lights out there, we do a 50-50 on those. We've replaced some lights the first year I was here, so 2 years ago. And so we share cost on those. CIP projects, we do some cost sharing. It's in the body of the agreement as well if benefits both parties. If it's just infrastructure like we have in the budget right now, that's on us to fix infrastructure issues. Any questions so far? Okay, I am happy to answer any questions. I know that this is a little more in depth of an agreement, so I was looking for mainly questions so I can help facilitate those and then bring it back to y'all to look at it again and then possibly vote after that meeting unless you're comfy at the next meeting.
So I think what would help me would be at some point in time see a sign off by our interim town attorney. Because
He's actually,
but somewhere on here that he's kind of like what we do for a contract, that he's reviewed it and we've heard he has, but
you need to see the email that he has.
it would just, hey, it's been reviewed, all the updates, because you guys have been updating it, and just, hey, confirmed the final copy's been reviewed and approved.
Not a
That's
problem.
all. There's a couple of questions I did have, this curiosity. So, Section 3B. I'm curious as to why, when we're assigning the use of the field, why the priority needs to be a part of the WAA contract. that's our policy and how we're going to use it. And it's, to me, it seems like it's immaterial. Once we're making use or reserving the field, you're requesting of them. They don't need to know our priority as part of the contract. So in other words, they can't sit here and judge us on that part of the contract, because this is all to us.
So,
That's all. The way it reads, it looks like they get to approve how we do our business, and that doesn't make sense to me. That's one. The other question I had, if you go to section 5.02, it says athletic association agrees not to allow any loud, boisterous, blah, 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 all that stuff. I'm a little bit concerned that we're forcing them to be a police authority, because it says they're accountable for it. I'm wondering if there couldn't be some language that says, in the event this happens, they're to contact the appropriate authorities to address it, just because you want the police handling those things. You don't want individuals handling it. And this seems to say that they have to handle it.
okay, section again? I'm sorry.
5.02. And if the attorney's good with that, I'm fine. It's just the way it read, it just seemed like,
I had the same question. If they're not going to allow it, exactly what are they going to do to disallow it? Yeah.
yeah, it's just, I don't want to put that burden on any individual citizen or a young kid that's a referee or something like that. I mean, that's putting a lot on them. So, but the rest of it, I mean, do others have questions?
I just have one.
Mr. Lee?
Dena, is there anything new this time around in the indemnification area?
The identification area. Oh,
Section 8.
yes. No, Mr. Charlie didn't have anything else.
Oh, it's boilerplate. Okay. That was my only question.
Just one last thing. So like on the accident incident investigation report, somewhere in the agreement, maybe make sure WAA knows that these become public records. And as part of this agreement, they're agreeing to the open records laws that we have to abide by.
Bye-bye, yes.
Other questions? Thank you, Dena. Thank you for
You're
bringing this
welcome.
close to the finish line.
We're getting there.
I know it's been a lot of work, so thank you. Next up, Mr. Jeff Wells. He's going to bring that smiley face up to talk about how fun it is to talk about modernization of planning and zoning regulations. So I look forward to this one.
Thank you, Mayor. I know that's a big about face to talk about Parks and Recreation and then to go to NC General Statute language. But I wanted to take a short time this afternoon to make the board aware of some recent legislation that was passed by the NC General Assembly, what they have called the modernization of their planning and zoning regulations throughout the state. I'll give you a little bit of a history of the statute language and how it got to this point, as well as some of the specific highlights associated with it and how that will relate to Waxhaw, as well as the opportunities that that provides us ahead with our ordinance update and land use planning. So, just in case you're interested, it's 198 pages is the annotated section. So. It's quite the interesting read, and certainly good for bedtime reading if you want to get put to sleep real fast. But this originally goes back to 2015, so about 4 years ago, and it was originally proposed by the North Carolina Bar Association There was some discussion in 2017 about it, but it did not make it through the process until just about a month ago, where it passed. It is scheduled to be effective by January 1st, 2021, and consolidates the sections 160A, which is the city and towns statutes, and 153A, which is the county statute specific to planning and zoning, into a new statute that'll be called 160D, and specifically from the state, it's legislation that was introduced to consolidate, reorganize, and modernize the state's planning, land use, and development regulation statutes, basically with the idea of making it easier to look up what you're looking for in reference to the statute, instead of it being spread out in different sections. So a lot of the language is not different. It's just taking from both and forming it into one statute. But there are a few specific things of note that I think you'd be interested in. One, a fairly substantial change that I think will affect Waxhaw pretty significantly. But one of the first things that the state wanted to reiterate is that development approvals do run with the land. Apparently that's been a question in some areas of the state where developers have thought that they would get an approval and that could transfer anywhere with them. Well, the state wanted to clarify that in the statute language that is not the case. It is specific to a piece of property. It also will maintain the ability to adopt temporary moratorium if a jurisdiction chooses to do so, but it would be with a, quote, reasonable duration, which they don't really define, but that would still be an option for jurisdictions.
And did they keep in updating your UDO is not a reasonable excuse or reason to use?
Well, they didn't really define that. They
Yeah.
just said, quote, reasonable, and I guess that's just left up for a court to decide, I suppose, if it got challenged.
'Cause that's been in the previous language.
Yeah.
The fact that you haven't kept your plan up to date is not a reason that you can stop development.
Well, yes,
Yeah.
that is correct.
Yeah.
Permit choice, this is an interesting one. If you have a regulation that changes between the time an application is made and approved, the applicant can choose which version to adhere to. So if they get caught, like a longer process that we might have, some type of conditional zoning process, which can take several months, if something happens along the way where a regulation changes, the developer would have the choice whether to adhere to the original regulation, whatever that is, or to the new regulation, whatever that is. So that's, I guess, a development lobby, something like that was able to successfully get that added to the statute. It also provides a baseline for all development approvals of 1 year. You have to have an approval process that is good for at least 1 year. They can be more than that, but that establishes the baseline. And they do have some other specific examples in the statute would be more than 1 year as well, like a multi-phase development plan, which they define. Those would be more than that. Development agreements can be more than that, but the baseline is 1 year.
Is there a time limit on the permit choice? So is it forever? Or we change an ordinance. You can choose one or the other, but does that run forever, or is there a time limit on that?
I did not see any specific time limit, but my interpretation would be is that as they are going through the process and get to the end game, they have to decide which one that they want to adhere to, would be how I would interpret that. And just reiterating options that Waxhaw would have for ETJ if this was a route that we chose to explore down the road, but we would be within the 10,000 to 25,000 population. We would have the ability to extend that up to 2 miles, but you can only do that from your primary boundary, not your satellite areas. But you also must receive county approval. And another important thing to note is you must have proportional representation on your planning board and BOA. If you have
The
an
ETJ.
ETJ, yes. So, for example, if you had, if Waxhaw 20,000 population and extended an ETJ, just make up a solid number, 5,000 people, you would have to have a quarter of your planning board or BOA represented by citizens that live within the ETJ.
So what happens though, like, so, use for example, say, out the Waxhaw Parkway, just, you kind of draw a line. Nobody's living there right now. It's undeveloped. How does that work? Is they just take it as the property owner?
It would be the total population within that, the estimated population within the area that you take in. So
As it is now, not as planned?
as it would be at that time that you
Okay.
brought that in, not as planned. Yes. So in plans, of course, we have our comprehensive plan, and we know that we're required by law to adopt statements of reasonableness, consistency with the plan. You are required to do that, but the statutes never said specifically that you have to adopt a plan. So now they put the word shall in there, that cities and towns, counties, etc., shall adopt and reasonably maintain a comprehensive plan. So, and of course, we've got that covered, so that is a good thing. But that's another interesting note. And of course, a part of those statements of reasonableness, you can approve it by saying it is consistent. You can also approve it by saying it is inconsistent. If you do that moving forward when this new language comes along, it will automatically amend your land use plan to be consistent. So I thought that was another interesting wrinkle. Now,
In essence, you can update the comprehensive plan on the fly.
that's right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. So, and this is probably the slide to pay the most attention to. The state has set the bar for the types of zoning districts that you can do moving forward. You can continue to do conventional / general zoning districts, which we do, form-based districts, which we do in the downtown area. We also have overlay districts, and we have our thoroughfare overlay district. I believe we have an airport overlay district. You can also do conditional districts, the legislative side of conditional zoning. What they have eliminated is the hybrid conditional use legislative / quasi-judicial conditional use permit process, and that is significant to Waxhaw because I haven't done the math, but I would estimate just by looking at the map that probably 50% of the town is zoned in some way conditional use. So that is a significant change that we will have to account for as we're moving forward in our process. Now, that doesn't mean that the quasi-judicial process per se is going away. It would just be done a little bit different. You may have heard in other cities, towns, counties across the state, they use what's called a special use permit. That term would be done interchangeably with conditional use permits, special exceptions, and one of the reasons that the state did away with conditional use permits is all that language would get confusing, and it would now be just a special use permit, but it would not be done in the hybrid zoning type way that it used to be done. It would be use specific, so you could have special use permits for certain type uses that could go on to a parcel and kind of be above and beyond what the underlying zoning is for that. So you would still have that type of tool moving forward, but it would not be its own zoning district. It would be use specific. That, I think, is probably, of all the things coming along with this statute, that is the most significant thing that we have to navigate moving forward. It also puts into one specific area, there are specific statutes to certain type uses. We're all aware of that. It talks about, for example, outdoor advertising signs, manufactured homes, solar collectors, adult businesses, things like that that have some special requirements that we always have to be mindful of. in our zoning ordinances, and it puts those all in one area. They were scattered out all over the statutes and puts it into one area, which is nice for everybody moving forward. So what does all this mean moving forward? Well, considering that we're going to have to incorporate references and changes involved with this statute, it's a great time to be updating an ordinance. So, and that's what we are intending to do. And of course, later this evening, I'll be introducing our newest staff member, and then we also have our final staff member coming along too. And so I intend in August to introduce the entire planning team to you. And so now that we've gotten that phase one out of the way, where we've built our staff back up, we can really focus on this moving forward. And we have the quality and quantity of people that we can get started on this process, and look forward to doing so. Since the statute language is required to be enacted by January 2021, I feel like that is a good goal moving forward. That's a year and 5 to 6 months to get this process done. What we will be doing as we're moving forward is looking at our current ordinance, the good, bad, and ugly about it. And then, of course, we'll be putting our own vision together of what we would like to see. We'll be creating our own timeline of that. We'll be developing that over the next few weeks to month, and then we'll share that once we have that developed as well. One of the things that we would like to do as part of that process is something that our comp plan calls us to do, is to revisit, at least on an annual basis, what we're doing. And we are doing that right now with our future land use plan, and looking at some opportunities that we would have there. And really, to me, you have to have your vision tool, which is your plan, and your implementation tool, which would be your ordinance, is in line with each other. And that's really the key to successful future development, is having those in line and communicating with each other correctly. And so we're looking forward to getting that process started, and looking forward to engaging the board and the planning board and the community in that as well. Another opportunity that is coming along in the very near future is the county is updating their land use plan, and they are inviting all the cities and towns within the county to come talk with them about growth issues. And so it's a great time for us to be thinking about that and share what our thoughts are specific to Waxhaw in the future. And so we look forward to developing those ideas and hopefully collaborating with the county moving forward as well.
Yeah, go back that one slide.
Yep.
On that last one, we all got the invite today, and it's for August 28th. I'd like to suggest to Matt and you and then the board, I think it would behoove us to have a work session on the 13th, because the 27th is the day before, and really finalize what really the technical team needs to present to the county, all of us agreeing to it, so we make it all about land use and comprehensive planning and not about politics, for lack of a better way to say it. And I think a good work session on that would behoove us, because otherwise we're going to have 7, 8, 9 people there. We got to speak as one voice, and because you got 13 other municipalities coming in.
Come to consensus on our message.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So
Great.
if you guys are okay with that, if we could get something scheduled for that Tuesday afternoon before the regular meeting on the 13th, that'll at least allow you time to then, whatever the consensus is, then to tweak that and make sure we're all on board. That make sense? All right.
That's all I had. Any questions?
My understanding was some of this is starting to take effect. There's certain things that have started to take effect. What's in the statute, wherever there's bigger changes, they're giving us a year or so to get to.
Yeah, and most of that would pertain to the January 1st, 2021. I mean, they were gracious enough and understanding that it takes time to incorporate changes into your ordinance like that. So I think that's a very good thing that the state has done to give everybody time to get in line. And it happens to be very fortuitous to us since we're beginning the process of rewriting our ordinance anyway.
Did they have anything in there that said, what's the penalty if you don't do it?
No,
Don't have it?
they didn't, but I don't want to find out.
No, I don't either, but in the past, they've put the emphasis on lawsuit and the towns that, or governing agencies at risk and paying all the cost on it. That's why I was wondering if they got specific this time.
I have not seen anything specific to it, but
We won't suggest anything.
that's right. We will make sure that we don't even have that as a concern.
All right, any other questions for Jeff?
Thank
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
And thank you for the Cliff Notes version of 190 some odd pages of reading. Welcome, Curt.
Hello, good afternoon.
You're going to lead us through the next two, or lead us through one topic and then bring the Main Street team up to talk about their work plan, right?
Yes,
Okay.
I will be, just so you don't get too excited, I will be actually doing the Main Street presentation. Chair and board chair have been traveling extensively this month,
Okay.
so it'll be me.
All right, we won't. No, I'm just kidding. Go ahead.
Okay, so I'm here first to talk about North Providence Street alternatives, a couple of different options we have, and this is as it pertains to the TAP grant. So, as has been presented numerous times over the past couple years, East North Main Street and North Providence Street will be converted to a one-way street as part of the TAP grant improvements. So one way on East North Main Street heading east, and then on North Providence Street heading north. So that you would no longer take a left off of North Main Street onto Broome Street or attempt to cross Highway 16. And that does a few things for us. It really contributes to the overall theme of what the TAP grant is about, which is pedestrian improvements, in the sense that it allows us to add a significant amount of sidewalk to the block, both blocks, without actually having to sacrifice parking. At the same time, it improves traffic safety. We had a traffic study done on it, and so when you no longer are trying to take a left onto 16 off of East North Main or cross over straight across, it improves that traffic safety there. So it's a real positive piece of the project, and really the most impactful piece of the whole TAP grant. But what we have been showing for this whole time, since about December 2017, was when what you see here was shown to the public in a public meeting, shown to the business owners and property owners along East North Main Street. This is East North Main Street concept, of course. It won't look exactly like this, but here you see the one-way road, widened sidewalk, a wall here that will help deal with the grade difference there, where we currently have a really high curb. Bumped out sidewalks, and this we don't have a concept rendition of North Providence Street, but this sidewalk widening here is essentially what would be on North Providence Street as well. And so this is what we've been showing. The reason we wanted to bring this to the board today is because of the fact that this has kind of been the assumption, and it's actually what we have designed. We're about at 90% design for the TAP grant. So that being said, we understand the importance that parking has in downtown more and more over the past couple of years since we originally developed the concept. Downtown has become more and more successful. We've had another pedestrian-oriented business locate on the block, the Waxhaw Creamery. We've had just an uptick in foot traffic and drawing more and more people to the downtown. We've had parking improvements done on the north side of the tracks, but we've also lost some spaces in the sense that a lot that used to be open for public parking is no longer open for public parking. So staff looked in the past couple months at an alternative that could lead to some improved parking numbers, and so we're here to present that option. The current design, and I know it's a little small, but I'll read it out to you if needed. The current design that we have, that we've been showing since 2017, and that we have actually already through most of the design phase, is here you have your existing angled parking. The parking is the same orientation, but in the tap grant construction, it will still be parallel spaces. You'll end up with about 12 feet 4 inches of additional sidewalk. So that's over and beyond what is currently there on North Providence Street, bringing the total sidewalk width to about 22 feet 11 inches, almost 23 feet wide sidewalk here, without losing any parking spaces on the west side of the street. You have 9 parallel spaces there today, and you would have 9 once construction happened. So that would facilitate a significant opportunity for outdoor dining by the establishment that's currently there, folks who may locate there in the future if this parcel is ever developed. And it would also contribute to town events, because that would be public right-of-way, so it would be a plaza area where people could congregate for events, and you could do a number of things with it. That's what we have currently designed. The alternative that we are looking at would, instead of parallel spaces, so look right here, here's your parallel spaces currently, this is the brewery, parallel spaces. What we could do is angle the spaces instead of parallel. What that would do is it would give you 18 spaces instead of 9, so a net gain of 9 new parking spaces on this block. And what you sacrifice there is some sidewalk width. It would, now as it stands today, it would add about 2 feet, about 2.5 feet of sidewalk in addition to what's already there. So you still end up with a wider sidewalk, it's just not significantly wider. And again, you would gain the 9 spaces. Both of the options, so with both of these options, you end up with the ability to have outdoor dining, because even with this option, you would end up with a 12-foot, 11-inch sidewalk. So you add 5 feet for ADA passage, and you still have about 8 feet where you could do outdoor dining, whether it's tables, chairs. A normal picnic table is only about 6 feet long, so there's still room. So you can do outdoor dining with both. The difference is with this option, with the parallel spaces, you get a lot more sidewalk, a lot more public space. With the second option, you get a little bit more public space, but a lot more parking, double the current parking on that side of the street. Just some additional considerations. North Carolina Main Street puts out a calculator that helps calculate the value of a parking space downtown, and what they do it as a function of your total business establishments, average sales at each, divided by number of days per year and number of spaces you have. If you apply that to Waxhaw, we can estimate that a parking space in downtown Waxhaw is worth about $26,000 a year. As far as budget impacts to this, we have this first option already designed for the most part. It's this option is only in this sketch form, so we'd be looking at approximately $10,000 in additional design cost for this. That would be funded with the TAP grant, existing TAP grant budget, reimbursed 50% by the state. So it's a minor cost in the scheme of things. So I do just want to note to the board that this is the option, this first option with the parallel spaces is what we've been talking about for a couple years. So this would be a change. The business owners, property owners were made aware of this possibility at the walkthrough we did on June 18th, where we invited folks out and we actually mocked up the site with some chalk. You can still probably see the lines out there. So they're aware of it, but it is a change, so I think it's important that we acknowledge that.
What was their input? Were they in favor of the additional parking spaces?
The number one concern I get by far downtown is parking. That's far and away. So, it is, I would say that the majority of businesses, majority of property interests downtown would support increased parking. There's, of course, some folks who might value the extra additional sidewalk, but again, you do get both to some extent.
What do you think's best for Waxhaw?
I think it's long-term in the public interest is probably to have more parking, because we know that that's only going to become more of an issue, and just if you look at the value of a space, by providing the public with 9 more spaces, providing the property owners of downtown Waxhaw with 9 more spaces, you're adding a tangible financial value as well as a quality of life for the people who visit.
Are these standard size spaces? They're not compact spaces, they're not longer or shorter, they're just standard parking spaces if they're angled?
They're standard spaces, and the one on the end, so that we wouldn't have to make them compact or smaller, we couldn't quite fit another one, so we put a space for a handicap instead of trying to put 2 right there.
Okay. Thanks.
Other questions for Curt? What do you need from us?
I would like just consensus on which design the board would like us to move forward with.
Thoughts?
Angled.
So you're talking about 2 feet less on the sidewalk to add 9 spaces. Is that generally what you were saying?
They would get 2 more feet still
With the angle?
with adding
Okay.
9 spaces. They just wouldn't get 11, sorry, they wouldn't get 12 more feet.
Okay. I got
Right now, we've been saying 12, now it would be 2. But you would still end up with a net gain.
Okay.
Thoughts?
In favor of the additional parking spaces.
Angled.
There you got it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Main Street Advisory Work Plan.
Yes, and again, the Main Street Advisory Board, they worked really hard on this over the past couple months. They met in June and they met in July to discuss this plan. So unfortunately, the chair and vice chair weren't able to actually be here today, but that's in no way a testament to any kind of lack of or disengagement, because they've really been involved, and I'm just presenting on their behalf. So what we've got, I'll go through this quickly here. You've got the work plan in front of you. Just a reminder, Main Street work plans have to be developed in accordance with the 4 points, which I think everyone's aware of now, because of the commissioners and mayor's involvement with the Main Street conferences over the years. We have to do it with this framework. I wanted just to show some stats for downtown. Over the past year, we've got up. I don't know how we're going to fit any more businesses on the kiosk signs. I'm going to have to talk to Jenny about that, because there's not really much more room. But that's a good thing. Still, when I did this slide a few weeks ago, only 2 vacancies out of 109 available spaces. As you know, the apartments are well underway, and this includes the Main Street Station in that number. A lot of public investment over the past year. At the board meeting tonight, we'll talk about how the McDonald Street Niven Price parking lot has been completed. That's a good thing. So Main Street Board did achieve some things over the 18-19 year. It implemented an Adopt a Downtown program. You'll start to see some of the fruits of that. We have the Waxhaw Rotary, who has adopted East North Main Street, and they'll be in the next couple weeks. I'll be meeting with them to talk about some first steps on that. We've had some quarterly meetings with the downtown businesses. The Main Street Board's been leading quarterly merchant meetings that have been well-attended, usually anywhere between 8 and 15 people represented, businesses represented at those meetings. We updated the downtown boundary. Of course, the Main Street Board was a big part of the ULI panel discussions. We're well represented there and got a lot of property owners out, help getting them out and involved in that. Collaborated with the Arts Council, and Gloria Friedrich worked real hard to keep the walking tour brochures full when she's taking her dog on a walk. Here's the Main Street boundary. It didn't show up as well here as it did back at the office, but that was approved in April. So we expanded the boundary a little bit. The 2019-20 work plan, again, it's developed with the Main Street 4-point approach. Here's the difference this year. There's a major, what they're calling vision initiative, plus your normal tactical day-to-day items. And this is, and I think I've highlighted it in what you have in your hand there, across here, 2 pages. But there's an acknowledgement that
This is what Main Street's recommending.
that's right.
Yeah.
So, thank you for that. Yeah, the town manager, Ferguson, and I met with the Main Street Directors team in June as part of our annual progress report, something that we have to do every year as a Main Street community. And we were candid with them, and they were candid with us. We said, look, Waxhaw feels different than the other communities that we see when we go to these Main Street conferences. We're not talking about blighted spaces. We're not talking about vacant properties. We're not talking about, just those kind of issues. Fortunately, we've got a lot of positive momentum, good economic statistics, and they said, yeah, you're right. We said we don't want to just sit back on our laurels here and just coast. We want to know how to move forward, but we don't. We want some advice, some technical assistance on how to do that. They agreed with us and said, really, Waxhaw. They listed a couple other towns that are in the same spot as us, but really only 2 or 3 out of the 65 in the program that are similar to us. And so the director, Main Street Director Liz Parham, said, what I'd like to do is come to Waxhaw and lead a visioning session, call it Main Street 2.0, if you will, and really look at how we can take downtown to the next 10 years. We did a vision plan in 2012. It's getting older now. And this would be a chance to have she would come in as Main Street Director for North Carolina Commerce. We would pull in property owners, business owners, residents, downtown stakeholders for an evening session where we would do really a revisioning of downtown. Then the following morning, the Main Street Advisory Board would then put together an actionable strategy plan to start moving that vision forward. That would, result in some changes to the work plan, likely, but we didn't want to just have nothing in place until that time. So this would be 3rd week of September has been thrown out there as a possibility that they would be able to facilitate that for us. And so that's really the major piece of the work plan that I think the Main Street Board is looking for some direction on, a consensus, okay, go forth and conquer. That in addition to your tactical items that you've got in front of you, but I can answer questions on any of these if you'd like to.
How would that be different than the ULI plan or study you call it? Would this be more of an economic development type of plan she's talking about rather than the design plan that ULI put out?
Yeah, ULI was, it really started with the real estate question related to some specific parcels that the town owned. And so they used that, they identified those parcels, made some recommendations for them, and kind of built it out a little bit from there. But it wasn't really looking at downtown as a whole, its trajectory beyond that. So it would kind of be a more comprehensive approach.
This would take all the boundary, the whole boundary, and look at it from an economic development.
That's right, because the board identified, the Board of Commissioners identified downtown as an economic development engine for Waxhaw at the retreat. And we talked even at that time, but is this it? Is this sufficient for our economic engine, these boundaries, that sort of thing, yeah.
Also could provide some input, timing-wise, to, as we walk through the ULI,
And I was going to say
Feedback.
Jeff as well.
and Jeff as well,
What
yeah.
he just mentioned regarding the
Right.
land use,
That's right.
and ULI, yeah.
So you got a combination of good data feeding a multitude of projects.
Timing's pretty good.
I say go for it. Go forth and conquer, as you say.
Thanks.
Other agreement?
Yep.
Okay. Very good. You're good.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Historic preservation. How are you?
Speak here in front of y'all. I'm Chris Moorfield. It's good to see you this afternoon. How do I use this? The facade improvement program, our first goal is the same as last year, to repair and maintain these facades within the boundary, preserve the historic buildings. We do educate the public. It's by a workshop that we hold annually so people know what's available to them that are interested in getting a facade grant. We, what do? We assist the applicants too with what they need, implementing the grant-approved construction and getting it approved within the timeline. So this is not really different from last year. The updates are just as we make recommendations to the BOC for consideration. Because we understand that we make recommendations, that's our job. Our goal this year, we had a focus on oral history and then public education, and for goal 2, we've combined them into kind of one goal with a focus on, we can educate people just for what are we preserving? You know, these buildings, the history of the buildings, what they used to look like, the photos, just that information we don't, I know from my own personal experience, people want to know that. They want to know what was before in some detail and be able to get it online. So we'd want to include that in the website kind of over time, build that up. And maybe some history about the town, like a listing of the town mayors and the town commissioners and little bios and interesting things. Just fun, or some old laws that don't exist anymore. We do have some oral histories. We'd like to make those available as well. We have a local storytelling event that we recorded that we could put online too, and have that all incorporated together. That's kind of what we were thinking into combining those. We did have a booth in May at the Town Festival, and I brought some of my own personal archives and pictures and fun things like that. And people were far more interested than I thought they would be. I mean, we were very, very interested in our history and what we do, which kind of led me to believe, okay, we put this on the website, we're going to generate interest and traffic. And you'll see an example. This is really something I did really quick, just to give an example of how we could put buildings up and just what they are, how they were first used, so people will know, like the Masonic Lodge was a store. It wasn't always a Masonic Lodge, just so they know. And like for the homes, this is Johnny Byram's house. Hugh Wilson Broom was a store owner, and you know, just what they were built for. And that's just a quick, those are just two, but just an example of some things we could do pretty easily. We have the information, just pulling it all together. Our last goal.
I think the idea of capturing the content and sharing the story is fabulous. I mean, right now we're relying on a couple of individuals, Joyce, Gladys, and like, and we can't continue in that mode. I mean, we need to capture this for the
And I have most of
future.
that history. You know, I have access to it.
Mhm.
Like I said, even with my own archives, I have some stuff. And so I know
It's
where
great.
it is, it can gather it. Like I said, we have it, it's just pulling it all together. I think people would really be interested in that. Like I said, what are we preserving and why? I even want to include the buildings that don't exist anymore. that would be fun too. So you could kind of see what was. Some buildings I've just recently heard about. There was another hotel, and I didn't know that. We had more than one. It was news to me. The historic landmark designation, we've got to identify what properties there are and encourage people to become, if they have a property, to consider it and educate the public about that. Let's see. Normal business items, the certificate of appropriateness, which you're familiar with. Training for WHPC members. We did go to a workshop this year, sponsored by the state, that was wonderful. And updating working documents, again, that's through that we recommend to y'all for consideration. That's what we do. We love working with Madison. He's great. Madison, do you have anything to add?
So I guess the goal of any work plan is just to get the go-ahead to go on with our work plan or to move ahead with modification. Our work plan, I guess from last fiscal year, is very similar in nature, and we're just basically maintaining and basically increasing the public outreach for historic preservation. Being new to the town as a staff member, the history is very important, and being able to, at the Kaleidoscope Festival and seeing the interest that citizens have, I think it's important to preserve and share the history of the town, because it's what draws people here is the history, the historic downtown.
I think what really surprised me was people that had lived here a long time were interested, and people that had lived here a year were equally as interested. And I think that's where we can find some unity.
Comments? I have one, and it gets to the pride part. If you could add as part of your plan, working with Public Works, we are National Historic, and those signs got mold and mildew, are at angles, et cetera. I mean, if we have it, if we want that declaration, it just shows a little bit of pride in that declaration. That's just a personal thing, minuscule dollar-wise, but hey, as long as we're doing the public outreach, let's show pride in everything.
We have it. That's a good idea. Thank you.
The only other thing I wanted to say, we made a change in the facade improvement grant this year, and I hope that if you see that that's affecting any type of preservation moving forward, that you would come back to the board and let us know if we need to make some changes again.
Yeah, we know everything's year by year, so you would know how that's working and whatnot, our suggestions that we have, of course. Yes, thank you. And
Any
thank
other
you for funding us. We appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Parks and Rec.
Put me in the hot seat tonight. Good evening.
You got a smile on your face, though, so it can't be.
Spent about 95 minutes in traffic. I made it in one piece.
That's your clicker.
And we're here to present to you our 2019-2020 work plan for Parks Rec Cultural Advisory Committee.
Do you want me to click it? Okay.
So it's been a good year, a busy year for us. We've accomplished quite a few things. The big one, as you all were heavily involved with, was the strategic master plan. We've developed and I believe put through the art policy, a naming policy, getting out of our bubble, if you will, and working with other town committees and volunteering at as many, if not all, town events and programs, which is really what we're here to do, is to promote and assist Parks and Rec, the Board of Commissioners, all the town departments as related to Parks, Rec, culture, art, greenways, anything outdoors, cultural related. Do that through a lot of avenues. Look for new funding sources, assist with special programs, facilitate programs and policies, work on developing long-range programs and facilities, really promote and get the community involved in the needs for parks and arts and recreation to maintain and progress a healthy community. Make recommendations for proposed community projects, acquisitions related to parks, arts, greenways. And then we try as much as possible to assist other advisory groups within the town. So, using all that as kind of a foundation, we've worked to develop our
Projects this year. Okay, go ahead.
So with that, we've developed our 2019 work plan.
Okay.
As you all know, the town has been growing and it's going to continue to grow for the foreseeable future. A lot of the park projects have languished, kind of fallen a little bit off the radar, if you will, for lack of a better term. Some other projects have risen in priorities, and we have also shaken the dust off a lot of our policies that impact Parks and Rec and trying to bring them up to date. So really doing all that, we're trying to create greater efficiencies and update our policies. We've got 4 main goals this year. Goal number 1 is to complete budgeted active parks and trails facility phasing. Detail.
You can.
Yeah, and that's it, yeah. That would be for phase 2 of Nesbit, which is the ADA walks, fence toppers, foul ball, netting. Number 2 is to complete a fundraising policy, something that kind of came out of as we were going through the naming policy. We saw a lot of other municipalities had a link to a fundraising policy. We can get into that in the future, but that's one of our goals we'd like to develop with you all. Goal number 3 would be to work on the phase 1 of the downtown park.
Fundraising includes the sponsorship, right?
Yes, sir.
Yes. On the downtown park, which, of course, I didn't write down exactly all that was in there, but it was the phase 1 aspects of the park as related to the master plan. And our 4th goal is to continue and to build upon our outreach program, continue to work with other advisory committees and maintain our presence via social media, via just hands-on, people out on the street in our nice green shirts at all the activities we can get to. Work plan that we're presenting is strategic goals help to advance the town's mission, vision, and values while being smart, specific, measurable, assignable, realistic, and time-based. Whenever possible, the goals take into account the potential to overlap with goals of other town advisory boards, committees, and maximize resources to ensure all the outcomes are consistent with the greater good of the town.
Ask for a consensus.
With that, we'll ask for consensus.
I have a question for you.
Sure.
You put in here goal number 3, the downtown park. Now, this board hasn't decided what our priority is, so if ours don't match with yours, are you prepared to make adjustments?
Yeah, absolutely.
Other questions? I mean, I think the plan looks fairly comprehensive. I think that, I think what would it be helpful for the board, Dena, at some other time in the future, is you also have a budget with a whole bunch of stuff in it as well, and that's sitting out here, and a couple of them go in here, but a lot of them don't, and that's what I'm trying to figure out. You know, you got a lot going on.
Yes, sir.
That's the thing, and that's a good thing, and I'm trying to figure out where you're helping with that, but also doing your own thing. Obviously, the sponsorship agreement or policies standalone, that's easy. But when you get into some of the budgeted active parks, that gets a little bit, some of that they can help with, some of it you wouldn't expect them to. And so just trying to understand that a little bit better as we go through the year, kind of.
Yes, sir. The committee has been great for definitely a sounding board on, especially with us finishing up our master plan. And we already have the phases within the executive summary of the master plan. And to see what's next when we go into our CIP discussions, it's kind of bringing those questions back up for the board to see where we would like to go next. And they would help with that as that sounding board. Any other questions?
Comments, questions? You got a lot of work ahead of you. You're going to have to start working from home so you don't have to spend 90 minutes in traffic, you know?
I agree.
Thank you for making the trip. I know with the storms, it's been a little difficult traveling today, so. All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And with that, we will adjourn the work session. See you in 45 minutes, or 40 minutes, depending upon which clock you're looking.